you for joining us tonight. For tonight's webinar, we're delighted to offer our Rainbow community a personalised webinar about fertility options for building your whānau. The presenters will touch on topics such as treatment options, an overview of the process for donor and surrogacy, HIV-positive fertility options, and transgender fertility options. Just would like to take a moment now just to thank our sponsor, Merck, for being able to bring this webinar to you tonight. Fertility New Zealand walks alongside all people facing fertility challenges. We do this through providing support, information, and advocacy. You can contact us through our helpline or our regional and topic support groups, and you can connect with us on social media through Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also join Fertility New Zealand as a member. Membership is free, and by joining, you can access some of our additional resources and you can support the valuable work that we do. Please visit our website for information and resources, fertility fact sheets, videos, webinar recordings, the Dandelion newsletter, and much more. I am delighted to now welcome Repromed's Medical Director, Dr. Devashana Gupta, and Counsellor Helen Nicholson. If you have any questions about the presentation, the webinar tonight, please add them into our chat box, and we'll also be watching on Facebook Live, so we'll transfer any questions over as well. So over to you, Devashana and Helen.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Kate. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Helen from Repromed, and just wanted to introduce our clinic to you. We're an Auckland-based fertility clinic, and we welcome everyone and are passionate about personalised fertility care. We really understand many people's desire for children and the importance of having a family. And we also understand that family might be made up of one parent and one child, and move all the way through to including two or more parents, a donor or perhaps two, maybe a surrogate, and perhaps a number of children. So we don't put any parameters around what family might look for you. We know that family doesn't always include genetic lineage, but it is created through love, sometimes social connections, and the contribution of others. We know that children might live in different families, but be genetically connected, and also that parents may form lifelong partnerships with the people who assisted them to become parents. We know that family building is a journey, and it's helpful to have a map to follow. And tonight, Devashana and I are going to try and provide a little Fertility 101 information session for you. So as Kate's already mentioned, we're hoping to cover the treatment options available for people, including some information on transgender fertility care and options for clients and donors who are HIV positive. We want to try and cover off some information on donor and surrogacy arrangements, processes around those, what the law is, and the involvement of the ethics committee in complex arrangements. I'm also going to try and talk about the issues which are commonly discussed in counselling, and then we've got time for questions and answers. So look forward to talking about the counselling side of things, and just want to hand you over to Devashana, who is going to start speaking about the medical side of things. Thanks, Devashana.
Thank you, Helen. Now, as well, firstly, hi. I'm sure you're all there, and it's kind of weird not being able to see you, but I hope you will enjoy our talk. As Helen did mention, we hope to treat a whole variety of families, and these families can be single mums, single dads, same-sex clients, or transgender couples. And today's webinar is obviously about a rainbow family, so we'll concentrate on that. We see a lot of donor surrogacy, or what we call third-party gamete treatment, where egg donation, sperm donation, surrogacy, or embryo donation even is involved. And that keeps Helen very busy, Helen, Lani, and her team very busy at what we do on a day-to-day basis. So if we look at some options that are available, now if we start from the beginning, a client may make contact, and sometimes this can be a free 15-minute contact just to suss out what options are available, and sometimes asking about what our waiting lists are for donor treatment. As you will be well aware, or may not be, that we do have a rather unfortunate long waiting list for sperm egg donors. So that free 15-minute might just be a sort of a general assessment of the field, and then we normally recommend a formal consultation to talk through the process. At that appointment, we'll take a history for client, if there is a partner, the client's partner, and then recommend some investigations. Now, these investigations would involve possibly some blood tests. In particular, for a cis female client, we recommend doing an AMH blood test, which is a blood test called anti-Mullerian hormone, and that checks the ovarian reserve and tells us, I guess it gives us a total fertility window, and what options can we tailor to that client in terms of treatment options. And along with that, there'll be other blood tests plus ultrasound. If there is a cis male partner or client, then a semen analysis would be recommended. Now, subsequent to that, they may want to go onto the waiting list, either be it the sperm donor waiting list, which is on approximate about 15 months, or the egg donor waiting list. In terms of treatment, when they get towards the top of the waiting list, Helen will talk about the counselling aspect of things. However, once that's done, they come back to see the doctor to talk about the treatment options. And one of the options are intrauterine insemination, or what we call DI, donor insemination, or autologous insemination. So that's with a partner's sperm. So as I've said, there can be either a clinic donor sperm or a known donor. And known donors can be one of several, I guess, options, but the two main options are someone you may know, or also someone that you might have met online or recruited online, through a forum, blog, etc. And then we talk about the process of IUI, or intrauterine insemination. Now, you can use just your natural cycle. If you are having a regular menstrual cycle, we just use your hormones and monitor your cycle, track your hormones, do scans, do blood tests, and then at the right time undertake the insemination process. Or on top of that, you can use mild stimulation, and that could be with some medications that create 2 or 3 follicles. And that's because we do know that the chances are slightly higher if you have at least 2 follicles, but we also know that the risk of multiple pregnancies can also be present with that. So this may be an option for a single client, same-sex female clients, or some transgender clients. Thank you, Helen. The next option available would be in vitro insemination, or IVF. Just your baby, as previously known. IVF has been around for 40 plus years, and initially it was developed for tubal factor infertility, but now it's used for a variety of reasons, and that can be to use your own eggs and sperm. You may proceed to IVF if there is concerns around the egg quality or egg quantity, so the AMH is low, or that you are over 37 or over 40, then IVF might be recommended as the first step. Obviously, if the tubes are blocked, then IVF is your best and only option. And if the sperm parameters aren't the best, then IVF would be the better option. So IVF can be with your own eggs, donor sperm, with your sperm donor eggs, or all donor gametes, so eggs, sperm, embryos as well. Now, embryo donation doesn't involve, or it initially obviously involves the IVF process, but if someone's receiving donated embryos, then you don't need to undertake an IVF cycle. all you need to do is similar to an IUI cycle, just monitor your cycle or take some hormone tablets, and then at the right time the embryo is replaced. Obviously, before you get to this stage is the whole process of a medical appointment, initial investigations, and of course counselling, which is a key component of all of this, which Helen will touch on later. Then we are seeing quite a few same-sex cis female clients undertaking reciprocal IVF, or commonly known as egg sharing. This gives us the opportunity for the two clients to both be involved in the journey. So one client might give her eggs, one might carry the pregnancy, or both might share the eggs, vice versa. And that's a great opportunity for both mums to be involved and, I guess, have their genetic content in the embryo and also have the experience of a pregnancy. So what happens is, say, client A will undergo an IVF cycle, get eggs collected, create embryos, and we probably freeze the embryos and then replace that in a frozen embryo transfer in the partner. And that's quite common and easily undertaken because it involves an IVF cycle with a subsequent frozen embryo transfer. The other options are obviously using surrogacy, and this can be gestational surrogacy or traditional surrogacy. In the clinic setting, we largely do gestational surrogacy, so that means it's another person's gametes, eggs, embryos, and then it's just replaced into a surrogate. We do know that traditional surrogacy, it's allowed in New Zealand, but that is largely undertaken outside of a clinic setting. But we do recommend that counselling should still be undertaken where possible, just to talk through the intricacies of this. For a surrogate needs to ideally, it's not mandatory, but ideally should have had a family or completed their family. And as I'm sure all of you are aware, donors, surrogates cannot be compensated in New Zealand, and I'm sure Helen will touch on that as well. But the process of surrogacy is a big ask for any client that's 9 months off their life, that they are, giving out of the goodness of their heart. So they do need to have a thorough medical assessment to make sure that they're medically fit to be a surrogate. If a surrogate has any medical problems or is over a certain age, such as 40, then we do recommend that they see an obstetric physician, which is just another separate doctor who has more of a medical mind, and they talk to them about the implications for pregnancy with the background of these health concerns or with the age as a background. And obviously, what we are referring clients to for them is also to get clearance to say, yes, that they are medically fit to proceed. And that might sometimes be a hurdle for some clients to overcome. Thank you, Helen.
Oh, sorry. Oh. Operator error, sorry.
That's all right. So this slides summarizes in some way some of the family building examples. So you will see on the far left, you have a single female using donor sperm, and they can undertake donor IUI or donor IVF. And again, that depends on their medical history, the donor sperm's parameters. Largely, all our clinic donors are suitable for IUI. Over time, sometimes they may become IVF quality only or unexpectedly become IVF quality. And if that's the case, we do advise clients beforehand before they opt to pick that donor. And then below that, you see a single cis female client using donor sperm and donor egg. And this would be because they have a low ovarian reserve or are older in age, and therefore donor eggs has been recommended as the best form of treatment. And then adjacent to that, you see two cis female clients using donor sperm and again doing donor IUI or donor IVF. And then below that is what we've discussed in terms of egg sharing. Thanks, Helen. And then in the last bottom end, we have 2 dead families using surrogacy and donor egg. And obviously this has to go through the IVF cycle in a clinic setting where gestational surrogacy is indicated to create embryos and then to replace subsequently in a surrogate. We always replace a single embryo into a surrogate. Largely, we also only replace a single embryo. And New Zealand is one of the world leaders in single embryo transfers. Thanks, Helen. So I have mentioned this in my earlier slides that we initially have a medical appointment to go through the process, take a thorough history, do an examination if indicated, and ultrasound if indicated at the time. We'd also request some investigations, including semen analysis, AMH, and other baseline investigations. So anyone undergoing treatment does need to have annual screening bloods done. So these are bloods for HIV, hepatitis, etc. All donors also need to be worked up for screening bloods and other tests as well, such as looking at their DNA, what we call the carrier type. And then we also screen our clinic donors for 3 common genetic conditions, and these are cystic fibrosis, spinal muscular atrophy, and Fragile X. Now, if a single cis female client is undergoing donor IUI, we normally recommend a HSG, which is a tubal patency test. And that just gives you peace of mind that, yes, my tubes are open, and yes, I can safely proceed with doing donor IUI, knowing that I'm not wasting time or money. And as mentioned, there's counselling throughout the process. And once a client who's on a waiting list gets to the top, they have a further review to just discuss the management and make sure that they're happy with the treatment plan going forward. So that is, in general, the medical management or assessment for donor or rainbow client communities. Now, just moving a bit laterally to transgender fertility care. Now, largely we would get referrals for fertility preservation, and I will come to that. But normally there is supposed to be medical management through the Hauora Tahine in the northern region, and that includes largely through the endocrine clinic. In the pediatric or pubescent clinic as well, if someone's seen early on and they need to have puberty blocking agents, so to halt puberty before they go into said pubertal changes. Hauora Tahine also provide management and referral for relevant areas such as fertility, gynae, voice therapy, and plastics. And in that aspect, fertility preservation. Now, this is also available under funding. So NRFS is a Northern Regional Fertility Service Provider, and they oversee all fertility treatment under public funding for the Northern region. Clients are seen and assessed based on a scoring criteria, which is a complex scoring criteria where you have to get X amount of points. And if you do get those points, then you can be waitlisted for public funded treatment. Same-sex female clients can get eligibility for that as well, and that's based on also history of previous treatment and obviously any biological infertility. But for fertility preservation for transgender clients, you can have egg freezing prior to undergoing commencement of testosterone. However, it is important to note that if you have already started testosterone, that you can stop the testosterone and then hopefully still be able to do egg freezing. It can't be done straight away, and sometimes it can take 6 months once you off the testosterone to then be able to proceed to an egg freezing cycle. And an egg freezing cycle is basically half of an IVF cycle. So undergo stimulation. So it's about 2 weeks of injections and an egg collection that's done under sedation and local anesthesia. It can also be done under general anesthesia for comfort or access. And then we freeze these eggs. And these eggs, well, any gametes in general, eggs, sperm, embryos can be frozen indefinitely. But we have a 10-year freezing limit in New Zealand, which can be extended after application of extension to the Ecard or the Ethics Committee. Now, for a cis male client who's undergoing transition, ideally you'd want to freeze sperm before commencement of estrogen, because once estrogen is commenced, the testicular volume shrinks or reduces, and subsequent to that, the spermatogenesis or the development of sperm is markedly hindered, and therefore you might not get a good sample preserved. So yeah, just wanted to highlight here that fertility preservation is available under public funding prior to transition. Thanks, Helen. And lastly, just wanted to talk about HIV-positive fertility options. We all know that all forms of treatment and even intercourse are now a safe option for those with HIV, living with HIV and taking antiretroviral treatment. What they really want to push out there and make common knowledge is that zero viral load is equal to zero risk of transmission of HIV. A few years ago, some people of you may be aware that there was this organization, Sperm Positive, that was developed to try and promote this awareness, and therefore they had HIV positive sperm donors, and they were in essence, I guess, linking to recipients. But the demand was such that I guess they maybe were quite overburdened with it. And that's really great that, you know, people are out there and aware of this knowledge and this not idea, but this information that zero viral load equals zero risk of transmission. So therefore, you can be a donor if you're HIV positive, as long as your viral load is zero or close to zero. It should be under 50. And also, you can undergo fertility treatment or conceive if that's the case. So recent data has shown that there's no single transmission of HIV to a HIV-negative cis female or fetus in well over 12,000 IUIs or over 4,000 IVF cycles. I gave a HIV talk a few years ago, and the numbers were smaller, and at that time I scoured the data and there was not a single case report. And again, I've scoured the data and there's not a single case report, which is really reassuring. Options are you can have timed intercourse over the period of ovulation. If you have ovulatory issues, you can take medications to get you to ovulate or create follicles/eggs, and then have intercourse over that time period. Or you can do treatment through a clinic, and that again is either of IUI or IVF. And basically, when the lab washes the sperm and preps the sperm for IUI or IVF, the HIV virus, which in a zero viral load person in essence is not present, but in someone who does have maybe some viral load, the virus and the particles are in the semen, and when the sperm is washed, all of that is removed. So in essence, that's all taken out anyway. So there is call for clinical acceptance around safety of both assisted and unassisted methods of conceiving when living with HIV. That's all from my medical aspect, and I'll hand it over to Helen.
Thanks, Devashana. So you've talked about the different kind of gamete donation arrangements already. I'll just skim through the next couple of slides. When we're talking about gamete donation, this will include egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, and also egg and sperm donation in combination with one another. And all these arrangements, as Devashana's already kind of flagged, can include known or personal donors and or clinic donors. So there are options for people, hopefully, around whether they want to proceed with a donor who they might know and or a clinic donor, depending on the situation. And also, as Devashana has outlined, there are several steps which can take up a bit of time to cover. So sometimes I'll be asked how long it might take to work up a personal sperm or egg donor. And depending on everyone's availability, the donor's availability to attend appointments and have blood tests and do the things which they need to do, I think it's pretty reasonable that it can take about 4 months before the donor's done everything that they need and all the screening quarantine requirements have been met before they go to treatment. So in terms of if you need to use a clinic egg donor or a clinic recruited sperm donor, once you've moved up through the waiting list and the clinic contacts you to say we've got profiles to show, that actually means that all the work up for the donor has been completed. So once the decision around who you're going to choose to be your donor has been made, then treatment can commence fairly quickly. So when I'm going to talk a little bit about the information on a clinic donor's profile. This is a question I get asked a lot. And profiles include information which the donor has decided they're willing to share. And so there's some variation sometimes across profiles about how much information will be on there. Generally, all the profiles include information on the donor's physical characteristics, you know, how tall they are, what colour eyes are, hair colour, wavy, straight, that kind of thing, left-handed, right-handed, glasses, you know, eyesight issues or not, allergies, that kind of thing. So there's information which can be scanned through relatively quickly on physical characteristics, and then donors provide information on their family medical history, what type of education level they might have achieved, what they have done and might do for a job, what the talents and skills that they identify that they might have. And we ask donors to speak a little about what their motivation was to donate, so that as a client you have a sense of what that person's values are and the reason they decided to come to a clinic and offer to be a donor. And we also ask them to give an indication on their openness for contact with a donor-conceived child in the future, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we move through this webinar tonight. If embryo donation is an option that you might be considering around building a family, in clinic facilitated embryo donation arrangements, by the time that we contact people to say that there are embryo donors who are looking at profiles, then the donors will also have completed most of the counselling and baseline investigations. So the clinic has done its due diligence, checking to see that the embryos are appropriate for donation, and preliminary counselling has been done with the donors, karyotyping has been done, so that we know that what we're offering to people is providing a good chance or opportunity for a pregnancy. But in embryo donation, once profiles have been picked, so in an embryo donation arrangement, embryo donors have the opportunity to choose a profile of embryo recipients. Profiles are shared, and once an embryo donors have indicated the recipients they might be wanting to donate to, then we share the donor's profile with the recipients, so that then recipients get to have a look at who the donors are and start to discuss if it feels like a good match between both parties. Then we go on to counselling, and the embryo donation arrangements require ethical oversight, and that ethical oversight comes from the Ethics Committee of Assisted Reproductive Technology. And I'll talk now a bit about how Ecard works. So in New Zealand, there's the legislation, which is the HART legislation, which stands for Human Assisted Reproductive Technology Act, and that provides the framework for third-party arrangements, that's donation and surrogacy arrangements, and it also provides regulation around fertility treatment, including the requirement for Ecard oversight on arrangements which are considered complex. And so the definition of complex, or the kind of arrangements which fall into that category, include embryo donation, surrogacy, donated egg and donated sperm treatment in conjunction with each other or combination, and also some situations where eggs or sperm are being donated between family members. So that might be something like an intergenerational arrangement, maybe where a niece is acting as an egg donor to an aunt, or it could be, the definition is, that definition comes from Ecard. It's not a definition that the clinics make up themselves. So in some family arrangements, which are not just straightforward sister to sister or brother to brother or cousin type relationships, then we have to do an Ecard application discussing the complexities of the arrangement within the family. So in those instances, we have to go through this process of working through an Ecard application, and the Ecard application is then submitted to Ecard. It includes medical reports from medical specialists for, as an example, I'm going to talk about surrogacy. So it includes reports for a medical specialist for the intended or non-birthing parent, a medical report for the birthing parent or the surrogate, counselling summaries for both parties, legal advice in the case of surrogacy. Legal advice is not required for embryo donation or egg and sperm donation in combination, but it is for surrogacy. And that legal advice comes from independent lawyers outside of the clinic. And there might be other documentation which is included in an Ecard application. So that might be other letters from medical specialists, or it actually can be people involved in the application can put in a letter themselves to the committee. There could be letters from family members included, or significant others. So the applications can be quite big, ranging to many pages, and they're submitted in non-identifying forms, so people are not identified by name, submitted to the committee. And the committee is made up of medical, legal, scientific, health sector, and policy specialists and advocates. So there's a range of people on the committee, and they act independently of the clinics and review applications under the guidelines which are created from the HART legislation. Ecard meet several times a year. So for instance, they've met 6 times this year. However, it can take several months to get all the requirements of an application met and then submitted. So often people ask me how long it might take to get an application to Ecard, and for an arrangement, a complex arrangement like surrogacy that might be including an egg donor or a sperm donor, I think it's reasonable to expect that it could take 4 to 6 months, depending on everyone's availability to attend and meet all the requirements before we can put an application in. And the clinics will assist you with the facilitation of an application. We pull all the documentation together and submit it on your behalf. each clinic will charge for an application to be put together. It represents many hours of work from everyone involved. Unfortunately, there's no public funding available for people to access, even if their treatment is publicly funded. And Ecard applications themselves, there's no funding for those. And ballpark at the moment, I think on average across each clinic, the cost of an Ecard application sits at around about $3,500. So, as I've said, surrogacy can include egg donation, it can include sperm donation, it could include egg and sperm donation in combination, or embryo donation. So this was the introduction of not having a genetic link or a gestational link to a non-birthing or intended parent came into play in about September 2020. And so now surrogacy can include all different types of donation arrangements. And as Devashana's already talked about, she's kind of provided common definitions of surrogacy. When we're talking about gestational surrogate, we're talking about a surrogate who's not genetically connected, but carries the pregnancy following embryo creation. And then versus a traditional surrogate, where the surrogate carries the pregnancy and is also genetically connected. She's provided her own eggs, and that could have been through a home insemination process or maybe inseminations at the clinic. Devashana touched on earlier that the Repromed's happiness to provide a counselling service for intended parents and non-birthing parents and surrogates involved in traditional arrangements. So that even if what you're doing in terms of trying for pregnancy is happening outside of the clinic, we're happy to provide counselling and support to talk through the issues and process with you. And as I've noted below, donor insemination treatment at a clinic can be facilitated if needed. But if we're going to move into helping with the treatment side of things, then our clinic has a policy that we'll put into Ecard an application for non-binding approval. So Aotearoa has an altruistic surrogacy model, and Devashana's already touched on that. The altruistic surrogacy model is supported by the Heart Act. I guess that's the word to use. The Heart Act actually prohibits certain commercial transactions relating to human reproduction. That means that surrogates can't receive valuable consideration for their participation in an arrangement. That valuable consideration is language from the Act. So surrogates can't be paid or compensated in any form for their role that they're playing in carrying a pregnancy. However, it is possible for intended parents to provide for pregnancy-related expenses, anything to do with an application or treatment, putting things together, supporting a surrogate through a pregnancy can be recompensed, I guess is the word I'm going to use, by intended parents. And your legal advisor will talk with you about the parameters of that. The surrogacy legislation also prohibits intended or non-birthing parents to advertise for a surrogate. So what this means is that clinics can't facilitate matching intended parents with surrogates or vice versa. Often people come and will be talking with me about their plans for surrogacy and how they might be thinking about who their surrogate's going to be. And unfortunately, clinics are not in a position where we can provide a pathway for that. And our suggestion as clinic counsellors is for intended parents to use their own networks to find an altruistic surrogate. And we're really happy to talk people through that as much as they need, how they might do that, start those conversations, or where they might be looking for resources if there's no one in their own network who would be suitable to be a surrogate. There is a bill before Parliament at the moment. Tamati Kofi's bill is before Parliament, and the Law Commission have done a review on surrogacy. In the future, there might be some changes coming about in regards to some of the things that I'm covering today, but at the moment, this is the landscape that we're working with, and everyone in the clinic is pretty familiar, and in clinics across Aotearoa is familiar with the process. In terms of when intended parents are ready to start an application, then what we do is we arrange first and foremost a doctor's appointment, both for an intended parent and or a surrogate. We set up counselling appointments and provide information on where to get legal advice. And we also direct you to contact the adoptions team at Oranga Tamariki to organise for a social worker to guide you through the adoption assessment. Because in New Zealand, surrogate and her partner, if she has one, is legally recognised as a child's parent until a formal adoption occurs. And all intended parents need to make a formal application for adoption in order to become the legal parent. So it's a really crucial part of the process. So I'm going to move on. I'm aware of the time and we want to leave plenty of time for questions. I'm just going to move on to talking about some of the issues which are commonly discussed in donor and surrogacy counselling. Counselling is often a mixture of providing information around the legal framework for third-party reproduction and exploring what is important to you. We really want counselling to be helpful and supportive, and we also want it to be informative. So for donor arrangements, 2 counselling sessions are required, and a number of things are canvassed in these sessions, and sometimes more sessions might be needed. So we assess that as we go along. So as I said, the Heart Act provides the framework, and it also provides for donor and surrogacy arrangements, and it also provides for the Heart Register. And the register is where information about donors and donor-conceived children is recorded and kept. This is based on the first of the 7 principles of the Heart Act, which states that all people exercising powers or performing functions, so that would be us in a clinic, must be guided by the principle that the health and well-being of children born as a result of any ART procedure should be an important consideration in all decisions about that, and the rights of donor-conceived children to be able to access information on their genetic heritage is why we discuss the register in donor counselling. We also cover legal rights and responsibilities of donors, of surrogates, of intended or recipient parents. We talk about the storage limits for sperm, eggs and embryos. We talk about limits on family numbers for clinic donors. So Repromed has a 5-family limit on the number. So that's the number of families that can be created from one donor. And we discuss the reasons why we have those limits on the number of families. We'll talk about the right of donors to withdraw consent, and at what point the point of no return is really, I guess, in terms of donors' ability to withdraw consent from an arrangement. We talk about information that's recorded on birth certificates, and we also talk about decisions about the on-donation of unused embryos and the law around that. We're covering off decision-making, your preference around who your choice of surrogate or donor might be, all the factors that are important to you around that. We talk about disclosure to donor-conceived children and surrogate-born children, openness with them, and how to support donor-conceived children with information. We talk about their rights. We talk about research finding and what your hopes and expectations of information sharing or contact might be in the future with donors or surrogates. We talk about maintaining existing relationships and how to manage a breakdown of a relationship. And we also talk about donor and recipient linking and recipient family linking across families. So there's a number of stuff that we talk about, and so that's why it can take 2 or more sessions. We cover want to check knowledge on that you might hold around the treatment, what the processes are in the clinic, the requirements of the surrogacy or donor program in the clinic. We talk about how we can help you, who your supports are, how you might talk and respond to questions for others. We talk about things like how you're going to prepare for possible bumps, holding on to hope and self-care through the journey, how we cope with unexpected information and outcomes. We try and signpost to resources as well. And then in surrogacy arrangements, we're covering off in particular how relinquishment is going to work, pregnancy care and planning, how to cope with a change of mind, decisions around termination of pregnancy, and the adoption process. So it's quite a lot we cover, and for an Ecard application, all of that is recorded in the application and presented to Ecard. So I think we've got a bit of time for questions, and hopefully there are some, and Devashana and I are able to help. Lydia from Fertility New Zealand is going to send the questions through, and I'll read them out, and Devashana and I will try and answer them. So Lydia, okay, I've got a question. A 2 cis male couple here. Hi, how long is the waiting list for an egg donor? What are the costs involved? Is there a possibility to get 2 or more eggs from the same donor, as we would like our children to have the same maternal genetic material? Thank you. Maybe Devashana, I'll answer about the waiting list and the cost, and then you can talk about the donor cycle. So the waiting list for an egg donor is it's long. Our recommendation is to try and find your own egg donor. There's much more demand than there is supply for egg donors, and it could take 2 or 3 years before an egg donor might be available through a clinic. So if you were going to come into a clinic and talk about your hopes for building a family with an egg donor, we talk about how you might find an egg donor within your networks or outside of that, what your options will be. The costs involved, maybe Devashana, actually, I can speak to the Ecard cost, which is kind of, as I've said, it's about $3,500 for an Ecard, but there's also a donor workup fee, and then there's the costs of IVF themselves. Are you happy to answer that, Dave? Oh, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I'm back. Thanks, Helen. We say on average an egg donor cycle will cost you somewhere around 20 to 23,000, and that includes a medical appointment for recipient clients and the donor / client or couple, and also then the workup of the donor, which we, as I mentioned, investigations including carrier type, genetic screening, and then the IVF cycle, which is somewhere around about 15,000. So yeah, on average, it's about 25,000, and we do have our costs, and obviously it can vary from clinic to clinic, and we do have our costs on our website. That's a good question, the last part of it, in terms of same maternal genetic material, and we have seen increasingly 2-dad couples wanting to have both of their, I guess, DNA used or utilized in embryo creation. So that can be a possibility. And again, I'm only speaking to our clinic, whereby an egg donor, if she has a good AMH, goes through a cycle, say gets 20 eggs, 30 eggs, that's a great number of eggs, and you can then split those eggs into two halves and use both dads' DNA in one half. Well, not both, but one half for one dad, the other half for the other dad. And we keep them as two completely separate cycles in the lab. And therefore, we can monitor which of these embryos from which group are going on to develop and then are frozen. Not all donors give us reasonable egg numbers, and that's obviously dependent on AMH and how they respond to a cycle.
Thanks, Devashana. I think there might be another question coming through. I missed you when you mentioned the waiting list for sperm donors. Would you mind mentioning that again? Would the cost be around the same that were just mentioned for the cis male couple? Okay, so I think I'm going to try and answer this. So the waiting list for sperm donors at Repromed is about 18 months long. And it could be more or less in other clinics. I'm not aware of the exact length of time in other clinics. I think we sit around a similar length, but I can only speak to Repromed. I'd be thinking it would be reasonable to consider 18 to 24 months. And if it's shorter, that's great. And would the cost be about the same? So I guess it depends on the type of treatment. So if you don't need to, so sperm donation for a cis woman or two cis women doesn't require Ecard, so it's just considered an established procedure. So there are no Ecard costs. So it would just be the cost of using a clinic donor for treatment, and then depending on the type of treatment would affect the cost. So insemination treatment costs less than IVF, but can add up depending on the number of inseminations needed. Devashana, is there anything that you would add to that?
No, I mean, you're right. So as Helen said, an IVF cycle on average would be around 15,000, and IUI cycle on average would be around 2,000. But then if you're using donor sperm, then you'd add the use of the donor. And if it's a clinic donor sperm, then you'd pay for the use of the clinic sperm donor per each cycle you do, so per each donor IUI. If you're doing an IVF, you just pay the once because then your embryos are created. So at the initial workup using a clinic donor sperm, your costs at the startup might be a bit less compared to a personal sperm donor because you do pay for preparation of personal sperm donor, but then you don't have to pay each time you use your personal sperm donor. So it kind of does balance it out.
Yeah, thanks, Dee. Is there another question? Hi. How should we start the process, e.g. the next few steps? Can we freeze sperm first and wait until there's a suitable egg donor and then move through the process? Good question.
Should I answer that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I guess it'd be good to have a background to that, but generally speaking, unfortunately, cis females, we're born with biological clock, and that indicates that our fertility declines. So therefore, considering egg freezing is an option for some clients where they might not be in a situation where having a family is viable. In terms of sperm, we know that men are fertile for their whole lives. But we do know that a male over age of 45 does have a slight increase in association of children being born with some conditions like schizophrenia, autism. So can we freeze sperm? I don't think you'd need to freeze sperm if you are, very far away from getting to 45. But if you are at getting to 45 and having a family isn't anything in the immediate future, then freezing sperm might be an option. I hope that was the answer or the question that you were asking.
Yeah, I guess the pathway into a clinic, so going into the very first step to have the discussion with the medical specialist is the first thing. So a pathway into the clinic, make an appointment with the clinic to see a medical specialist so you can start the process really. And the medical specialist will talk to you about having a sperm analysis. That's what you do, and then go from there. The discussions about the options, maybe come through to the counselling to talk about how you're going to try and find the people that you need to build the family that you want. Yeah. Lydia, is there another question coming through? Maybe not. Hey, Devashana, I'm not sure. Oh, sorry. Devashana, I was just going to ask, did you mention kind of the age range for an egg donor, that a preferable egg donor?
No, I did not. Thank you for reminding me. So let's forget the lower age, 21?
Yeah. Or 20, under 20 requires Ecard. So
Ecard, yeah. So we do prefer, for a clinic egg donor, we do prefer the donor to be of the age of under 36. And that is to do with, the chromosomal abnormalities that can increase as we get older, or do increase as we get older. Having said that, a personal donor, if you're bringing someone that you know, can be of any age, as long as you're aware. Obviously, first of all, as long as the AMH is fine, but as long as you've had a thorough discussion about the pros and cons. So 36 or under, ideally over the age of 20, to avoid an Ecard application. And for a sperm donor, our clinic sperm donor cutoff age is under 45, and again between 20 and 45, and that's to do with the association that I mentioned earlier in terms of some conditions such as autism and schizophrenia.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Dave.
There's another question, Helen.
Oh, so there is. Can any of the initial processes be done online, or must it all be completed in Auckland? We are outside of Auckland and would need to travel. Oh yes, things can be done virtually, absolutely, because so much has been done virtually over the last couple of years. We're better at it. There are some things that really do need to happen in the clinic in terms of when we're dealing with people's bodies, but initial medical consults and counselling and stuff can be done over, telehealth. So it's not a problem if you're outside of Auckland, not at all.
And on that note, initial investigations can also be done out of Auckland as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah. And does an egg donor need to go through the Ecard process? So only in these complex arrangements. So if you want to be an egg donor, and so if you're thinking about being an egg donor and going through a clinic, then no, unless it's for a surrogacy arrangement. So anything to do with the surrogacy arrangement needs to go through Ecard, or if it's one of these complex family arrangements, or if it's egg donation in combination with sperm donation. So hopefully that doesn't sound too confusing. But if it's just a straightforward established egg donation arrangement where Ecard's not involved, then yeah, there's not that Ecard process to go through. But there is investigations, counselling, etc. that's required by the legislation, but not the application itself. Sorry, that might have been as clear as mud. So not every time, it's my answer. Okay, looks like Kate's coming back.
Hi, yes, I'm back. And that looks like the last of our questions as well. So just wanted to thank you for a really in-depth and thorough presentation from the both of you tonight. It was, very interesting to be here and be part of, and I hope that our viewers tonight got a lot out of this webinar. Again, I'd just like to thank our sponsor, Merck, for being part of our sponsorship and being able to provide these free information webinars to our community. And I'd like to give a big, huge thank you to Devashana and Helen for donating your time to be here tonight. And, we really value everything that you, the information that you put in and that you deliver for our webinars. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I just wanted to also share as well, if anybody on this page that is watching would like to connect with our Donor Conception and Surrogacy Network private Facebook group, please check us out on Facebook as well. All of our mentors have lived experience with donor conception and surrogacy, and it's just another support network for you to tap in and get some more support as well.
I think there's one last question there, Kate. Do we answer that?
Yeah, so that is just the end of the webinar. So I would like to wish everybody a great night, and thank you once again.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Thanks. And the last question, if you were just looking for any donor, we don't need to go through Ecard. That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. See you.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.